Buenos dias. Hello, my name is Ryan Hurljak. My Spanish sucks. Lo siento. I'm sorry. So I'm going to be speaking in English. I became an entrepreneur by accident. I was 6 in my grade 1 class, and I raised my hand. And it ended up changing my life and so many other people's lives. So I want to share with you guys today why I started, why I kept on going as I got older, and now why I continue today as an old 32-year-old man. Next slide, please. So one thing that I remember about grade 1, and I don't remember very much, is that it was a routine. I went to school, I tried not to upset my teachers too much, and I waited for recess at the end of the day. And that was it. Life was pretty simple. Except every year at my school, we used to have an annual charity fundraiser thing. We had to do it every year. It was part of the routine. So we used to do all sorts of things, like we raised money for cancer research, we did a canned food drive, and every year we would do something new. And my teacher, she was in her first year of teaching, and she wanted to do something a little bit different. So she got the idea that she got this big list together, and we were gonna raise money for specific things for kids our own age. So she had this list that was like 1 cent would buy a pencil, a couple of dollars would buy a blanket, and medicine and food and all these different things. And then at the end of the list, it was the most expensive thing. She said $70 would buy a pozo, a well. And that was important because there were kids our age who were 6 and 7 years old, who couldn't go to school, sometimes got sick, and sometimes even died because they didn't have clean water. And we didn't understand at all. I remember one of my classmates raised their hand, they're like, why don't they just go to the sink? Why don't they go to the water fountain? Duh, problem solved. And my teacher kind of did that teacher thing. She's like, no, that's not how that works. And said, you know, kids your age don't have sinks and they gotta go far away to get water if there's not, oh, gracias. If there's not a well at their school. And they have to go really far, sometimes as far as 5 kilometers, which didn't really make sense because we didn't know how far 5 kilometers was. So my teacher tried to explain it to us and it didn't really make any sense. And she ended up saying that's about 5,000 steps. Here we are in my grade 1 class. There I am in the back, and there's my teacher. Oops, yeah, thanks. And 5,000 didn't make a lot of sense because I couldn't count that high. But I counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to get to the water fountain outside, to get to the sink. And I counted 10 steps. And I just came out of preschool, so like kindergarten. And one of the things that was like forced upon us was this idea of sharing in the classroom, that things were fair and things were equal. So when we heard that things were not fair in the world and not equal, we got a little upset with my teacher. We felt we had been lied to. It was this big conspiracy. So we got all up in arms, and my teacher kind of just shrugged and said, if you want to save money for something on this list, it may help, and you're welcome to do so. So we were deciding who would fundraise money for what, and then the well came up, and it was the most expensive thing. And I raised my hand, and I said, I want to fundraise for that. To which my teacher kind of just raised her eyebrows, and she was like, are you sure, Ryan? Because I wasn't at the top of the class. I don't think I was at the bottom, but I was just kind of there. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't participate unless I really, really had to. It's not something that I did. So my teacher thought that I wasn't taking it seriously or didn't know what I was signing up for. So she said, Ryan, this is a big part of our fundraiser. Are you sure you can do it? And I said, don't worry, I've got a plan. I'm gonna go home to my parents. I'm gonna ask them for $70. They're gonna give it to me. I'll come back and give it to you. And I thought it was a great plan because it's not like I wanted to buy something for myself. That would have been like 1998. So I think like the Game Boy came out then, and I didn't want a Game Boy. I wanted to do something, good. So I thought my parents would reward me by, I was doing something virtuous, something nice. So I thought it was a great plan. Went home to my mom and dad, and I said, can I have $70 to build a well? There are kids that don't have clean water. And my parents looked at me, and they were like, aw, that's so cute. No. And, went along making dinner. Both my parents worked. I had two brothers. It was busy, and I was 6 years old, so they kind of, ignored me, thought I was going to forget about it. But every time I had a drink of water from the tap, I reminded myself that another kid couldn't do that who was my age. So I pestered my folks for days. And my mom especially, I thought she would listen to me, but she really wasn't. And it kind of escalated. It got to the point we were having a Sunday family dinner, around the dinner table. And I remember my mom especially wasn't listening to me. And we had a few rules growing up, but one of the biggest ones we had, I remember, was that we didn't point. I remember pointing was the most rude thing you could ever do in my house. So we always got big consequences if we ever pointed. But we were sitting at the Sunday dinner table, and I pointed right at my mom, and I said, you don't get it. Someone just died because they don't have clean water, and you didn't help them. So I got into a little bit of trouble, and I got a timeout, but my mom saw I was serious. So afterwards, she said to me, Ryan, it's great that you care, but we're not going to give you $70. But what you can do is we're going to give you a chance to earn it. You can do extra chores on top of the chores you already do, and then we'll give you a little bit of money at the end of each week, something called an allowance. Then if you're serious, you can raise your allowance money up for this well. So I already had to do things like I had to clear the table and make my bed and make my room tidy. Now I was told I had to do things like vacuum, wash windows, shovel snow. For those of you unfamiliar here, it's not fun to be shoveling snow. It was a tougher job, but in exchange I got a couple of dollars at the end of each week. And my goal was to raise $70 by the end of my school fundraiser. And I was excited, I worked hard, and my school fundraiser was gonna last about a month. And by the time a month had gone by, I had raised a grand total of $25. So I actually failed, and by a lot. And I remember my teacher, she wasn't really surprised, maybe a little bit disappointed, because I was 6, so what are you gonna do? But I had this idea in my head. I thought that if I could get a well, everyone in the world would have clean water. That was my thought process, and I thought it was super important. So even though I failed and the fundraiser had ended, I decided I wanted to keep on going. So it took what felt like an eternity. It took 4 months of me vacuuming my house and doing all these chores, and I finally raised 70 Canadian dollars, and I was so excited. My school actually wouldn't even take the money anymore because the fundraiser had ended months ago. But my mom found an organization that did that kind of thing. They built clean water wells all over the world. So this is me telling the story about it. It was a school assignment with my great handwriting. And so my mom found this organization in the city where I'm near, a city called Ottawa, and they did that kind of thing. They built clean water wells all over the world, in the developing world. Whoop. There we go. And I was excited. I got all dressed up in what used to wear in the 90s. I had my Batman tie, I had my suspenders. I was really excited because I thought I was going to go build a well. And I got in, and they were nice. They said, they were kind of like my parents when I came home with the idea, They kind of tilted their heads and said, aw, that's so sweet. And showed me around their office and explained what they did. And they also mentioned that $70 wasn't enough to buy a well. It would just buy the hand pump that went on top of the well. the well itself, to drill it and do everything else that's included to make sure it goes in, at that point was going to cost at least 2,000 Canadian dollars. But they said, you know what, Ryan, this is going to help, good work, off you go, you can go home. And I told them before I left that I would just go home and do more chores and come back once I had $2,000. So we got home, and I remember my mom, who's in the picture there on the right, my mom said to my dad, yeah, it's not over, he's trying to raise $2,000 now. And my dad was like, oh my God, Dios mío. Like, I looked up to my dad a lot when I was a kid. He was a police officer. He used to volunteer basketball coach the two schools in my team, in my town. And I looked up to my dad a lot. And I had a talk with him where he said, Ryan, you showed perseverance and tenacity, and you followed through on your commitment. And you should feel proud of what you did. It's not going to build a well, but it's going to help, and you should feel proud of that. And it's okay to stop. My dad wasn't trying to be mean, he wasn't trying to be rude or put me down, but he was a grown-up. And he knew that the world's a complicated place with big problems, and you can't solve them by vacuuming the house. And he knew that, and he wanted to kind of save me the hurt from knowing that what I was doing wasn't going to have the impact I thought it was. But my thought process was the same. I thought that one well would make all the difference in the world. And I had made a commitment. My commitment was to build that well. And my mom always talked to me about keeping your commitments and following through. And usually I didn't when I was supposed to, do whatever around the house. So I thought it was important. So I went back to my house and I kept doing chores. That wasn't enough. So I ended up going to my neighbors' houses and doing chores for them. That also wasn't enough. So I went back to my school and I started talking to my friends. I started to get them involved and saying that this is really important. If we all work together and we all do chores, maybe we can fundraise enough money for a well. To which my friends said, yeah, no thanks. So I had to get a little creative, and I think I had my first ever fundraiser. It was a Pokemon card raffle. Something that had nothing to do with clean water, but if you have an interest that you're passionate about, you have to make it relevant and fun to the people around you. So a few of my friends who didn't want anything to do with it, all of a sudden were like, hey, I'll donate a few cards. Hey, I'll help sell a few tickets. And so people that wouldn't have gotten involved otherwise, all of a sudden became a part of it. And then we had a bump basketball tournament at lunch. And my teacher saw what we were doing, and she said, Ryan, that's great that you're still doing this. She thought that I had an attention span that lasted like 5 minutes, but I was doing this months later. And she said, why don't you give a little presentation to the class about what you're trying to do? And I really didn't want to. When I was young, I went to speech therapy. I couldn't pronounce my words correctly. I couldn't say F's or SH's or TH's. It was very hard to understand me. It was like I was speaking a different language. But I got up in front of my class and I gave a speech. I think it was less than a minute long. A lot of the words did not get across, but the message did. Here was Ryan, the whatever kid in class who wanted to build this well. And I think some of my peers kind of saw that and said to themselves, if Ryan is doing that, what can I do? And it became less and less of my project and more of my class's project. And then kids from all around the school started to pitch in. And then I did little fundraisers in my town, and it started to grow. And it took a long time. It took what felt like an eternity. It took a year. But we were finally able to do that well. And it went towards a school in a country called Uganda, a school called Angola Primary School. And they got the first clean water source they had ever had. And it was amazing. The school had been asking for a water source for years and years. And they thought that maybe eventually like a big international aid organization or the government would step in and help. But they heard that a kid had fundraised the money, and they were really curious about that. Because in their culture, even more than ours, and I'd say Canada and Mexico, when you're a student, like you sit down and you listen to your teacher and you wait till you're an adult to become a member of the community. But they took that for a message for their students that they didn't have to wait, that they could participate whenever they were ready to become members of the community. So it made a huge impact at the school. The school enrollment actually went from 700 to over 1,400 students, and it made this amazing impact. And they had wanted me to come and officially open the well, but I was, far away in Canada, so I said, it's okay. And, life went on, and I kept doing little fundraisers in my town. And then a couple years later, my neighbors, who I had done chores for to help fundraise the money for the well, they donated air mile points, so I was actually able to go and see the well and officially open it. And I would have been 9 years old, and I went, and it was pretty crazy. It was pretty loco. I went to the school, and there was this big celebration there. There were over 5,000 people. There was a feast and a festival, and everyone was just so happy because they had clean water. I don't have a smile that, lights up on my face because I can have a shower in the morning or a glass of water. So to see something that I considered so small to have that much of an impact on someone's life gave me motivation to keep on going. So I came back to Canada and I started talking to anyone who would listen to me. I called different schools in the area and I tried to, get myself in front of those students to start different fundraisers. I wrote letters to radio and shows around where I was from, and I started knocking on people's doors, telling them about what I was doing. And it was very, very slow, but eventually some people started taking notice, and it became less of my project and more across my town and then my province and then across the country. And there was little newspaper articles, there was a radio show, and then we got a call to the house from a television producer in the United States one day who wanted to interview me to see if I was good enough to be on their show. So I remember I talked to this television producer for over an hour and then hung up the kitchen phone, and my mom asked me who had called, what was the name of the program. And I said, something called The Oprah Winfrey Show. And my mom said, do you know what that is, Ryan? And I was like, nope. I watched Arthur's, Magic School Bus, the good stuff. Yeah. So my mom, I remember we had like a TV antenna with like 4 channels, but I remember she took me into the TV room and she turned on the TV, and sure enough, this person's show was on, and my mom said to me, this person has a program that a lot of people watch, and if you go on her show and you share your story, maybe more people will help. So this would have been around 2000, and back then, Oprah Winfrey, they called her the Queen of Daytime TV, and when she had a show and she broadcasted it live, over 200 million people across the world watched it. So my mom knew this and was trying to show me, hey, if you go on her show and you share your story, maybe a lot more people will help. So I kind of understood a little bit. And then they called back the next day, and they were interviewing me again to see if I was good enough to be on the show. So I remember I was talking to the producer on the phone in the kitchen. I remember my mom was on the other side of the counter, just kind of pretending to make dinner, just kind of listening. And then he asked, can you come to Chicago next Tuesday to be on the show? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm busy next Tuesday. And I looked over at my mom, and I think I saw murder in her eyes. She looked at me and she was like, what are you doing? And the guy was like, let me talk to your parents. And I remember I covered the phone. I said, I was not rude, Mom, but he wants me to go on Tuesday. And my mom let out a big sigh. She went, and she got on the phone and explained that I could not go to Chicago. I would have just entered grade 4 at that year. I would have been like 9, 10 years old. And grade 4 was the year at my school where you could be something called a peer helper, so like a volunteer at the school. And I signed a pledge at the beginning of the year saying that every Tuesday I would be in the kindergarten yard helping with whoever was on duty with like the really young kids, with like the 4 and 5-year-olds. And my mom knew this and knew that the Tuesday was the one day of the week that I couldn't do anything because I had a prior commitment. And my mom had taught me about keeping my commitments. So she knew I couldn't do anything. So she had to get on the phone and said I could not come. The guy was like, okay. And my mom hung up. I ran away. And it's kind of crazy because I think looking back, like it was letting go this big opportunity. But what got the Ryan's Well project so far in the first place was when the rules changed, when it was more expensive than I thought, when it was more complicated, and that never stopped. It always got more complicated. It always got more challenging. The goals got bigger. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world to say, this isn't what I signed up for. I give up, mercy. But my commitment always stayed the same, and that was the only reason why it went anywhere in the first place. So why wouldn't it be any different for my school volunteering? So I'd like to think, looking back, that I would make the same decision, but I ran away. My mom was a little upset. And then they called back 15 minutes later, and they said, Thursday, will he come on Thursday? So it all worked out, and it was around that time there was a big spark. There was the Oprah Winfrey Show. There was a documentary made about that very first trip to Uganda. It was the front cover of Reader's Digest, a magazine people used to read. And it was this big spark that let us create something called the Ryan's Well Foundation, with the idea being over the next few years, while this is in the media, let's try to fundraise as much money as we can and then close up shop after it's done. And that would have been 22 years ago now. And since then, we've done over 1,700 water projects ever since that first well, and we've helped over 1.4 million people get access to clean water all across the world. And it's kind of crazy to think that, all those accomplishments happened because of my overdue grade 1 school project. When I was in grade 1, I was not the smartest. I literally thought one well would bring the entire world clean water. I wasn't a leader. I liked sitting in the back of my classroom, waiting for things to be over so I could go to recess. If you were to pick someone to have any impact on the world, I would have been at the very tail end of that list. But all these things happened. And I think back, and now, like I said, I'm old now. I'm 32 years old. And I've been fundraising and volunteering for 26 years. I think the hardest thing I ever had to do was raise my hand in my grade 1 class. It wasn't something that I ever did, but I found something that I connected to, that I was passionate about, that I was interested in. And because I raised my hand, everything happened, the way it did. And I think as we get older, it's the easiest thing in the world to not raise your hand. You can find a million excuses. It's too complicated, it's too hard, it's not what I signed up for. With the clean water crisis, it's not something that's simple. There's still over 780 million people that don't have access to clean water. It's not just in one area of the world, it's all over the world. It has to do with taking care of the water we have and making sure the resources that we put in are sustainable and that they last, and community empowerment. It's complicated. But the commitment that I felt was simple. And sometimes you have to start with that. And when you're looking to make a difference in the world, or you're looking to be an entrepreneur, the hardest thing you can do is take that first step. When you do find something that you're interested in, to raise your hand, to take an action, to ask a question, because it could lead to something else. If I had never raised my hand, none of this would have ever happened. So if you do find something that you're passionate about, don't be afraid to do something, because it may change your life, or better yet, it may change somebody else's life. So just to give you a story of how water can affect someone's life, I remember when I was younger, when I was in grade 2, my grade 2 teacher heard about everything that had happened in grade 1 and said, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Why don't we expand on this project and get pen pals at the school where the well was built?" So like writing buddies, where you write letters back and forth. And we all got writing buddies, and my writing buddy ended up to be this kid named Jimmy. Jimmy went to the school before the well was built and after the well was built. Before the well was built, Jimmy used to have to get up really early in the morning to go get water for his family. It was part of his job, so he was allowed to go to school. Because there wasn't a well at Jimmy's village or his school, he had to walk really far away to go get water. He used to have to get up at midnight, in the middle of the night, and walk over 5 kilometers for him to the well, fill up 2 big jerry cans, come back, and then do it again, and then do it one more time. And then I like it when Jimmy tells the story, because then he would say, then I would have the privilege to go to school. When I was a kid, going to school was not a privilege. It was just something you had to do. But after the well was put in, Jimmy was actually able to go to school in the morning. He didn't have to fall asleep in class, and he could actually focus and do a lot better. He ended up actually becoming the #1 student in his class. He had about 70 students there, but he ended up becoming the #1, and because of that, they paired him with the well kid, with me, as writing buddies. So I wrote letters to Jimmy back and forth, and we became really good friends. And then I was able to actually meet Jimmy on that very first trip to Uganda, and we became even better friends. I'd say probably best friends. And I learned on that trip that he was an orphan, that he was being raised by his extended family, but he was fine there in Uganda, and I came back to Canada, and I was on my crusade to try to raise as much money as I could for water issues. And things were okay. And then a few years later, I remember there was a lot of conflict that was happening in Uganda at the time. There was a group of rebels who were fighting the government. They were called the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, and the conflict was getting worse and worse every year. And a lot of the fighting was happening closer and closer to where Jimmy was from. It got bad to the point where the rebel group was actually, they ended up raiding Jimmy's village, and they operate on child soldiers, and they were basically conscripting people from the village to fight in their army. And Jimmy would have been 12, turning 13 at the time, and they conscripted Jimmy. Jimmy ran off that night. He chewed through the ropes that were tying up his hands, and he ran off into the bush, and he escaped. And when he came back to the village the next morning, everything had been burned down. And the people that were left were really upset with Jimmy because he ran away, he upset the rebels, and in retaliation, they burned everything down. So people were really upset with him because he was selfish and ran away and angered the rebels, and now they've burned everything down and no one has anything left, and it's Jimmy's fault. So he was no longer welcome there. And like I said, Jimmy would have been 12, turning 13, so he was a kid. And we heard about all this a few weeks after it happened, because it was like 2002. It was like long, long time ago. And we were sending a few dollars for Jimmy's education at the time, but we felt that we were meant to do more, like my family and I. So we ended up getting Jimmy through the most complicated month of our lives. He ended up coming to Canada on a visitor's visa to attend a conference. There we go. So he ended up coming, and he ended up attending my school for 2 weeks, because when I went to Uganda, I attended that school, and it was a lot of fun. We learned more about Jimmy. He talked about his experience with water, and he was just so amazing to have around. And we learned more about what actually happened to Jimmy, and that he wasn't going safe to go back. So through a very long, complicated process, Jimmy actually became my brother. He became a refugee in Canada, and he became a part of my family, which was crazy. I remember he would have came, and he would have been going into grade 9 for his age. But his English wasn't great. It was his second language, so they had him at like a grade 4 English level. But he wanted to go right into grade 9, so he worked his tailbone off, went into grade 9. He graduated high school in Canada. He ended up going to university in Canada, out east. Then not too long ago, around 6 or 7 years ago, actually, he ended up getting married. There we are at his wedding. I was the best man. He kind of stayed the same height over the years, and then I kind of caught up and then surpassed him. Got married 6 or 7 years ago. Oh. And he has 2 kids now, even. So he has a boy named Quentin and a daughter named Amari. He married a Canadian girl from New Brunswick, from the East Coast. And I think the thing I remember most about Jimmy is when he came to Canada, I have a little brother named Keegan, and he used to bother Jimmy all the time. He said, "Jimmy, you smile so much. You smile when you sleep. What's wrong with you?" And it was true. Jimmy smiled like all the time. It was crazy. And I think about, when we talk about the hand that we've been dealt, the situations that we've been given, and I had, opportunities in front of me to do whatever I wanted. If I wanted to become an astronaut or a teacher or nothing, I had opportunities to do all those things if I really, really wanted to. Jimmy had to work so hard just to get to school, and then with the conflict that was in his life, everything was so tough. But he turned around, and second from me, when he got to Canada, he showed kindness and love to everyone around him. And it showed in all of his actions and everything he did to his family that he has now. And I think about what I would do in that situation, and every excuse in the world to be bitter because it's unfair. It's not an equal playing field and all these different things. And I think I learn about Jimmy every day, what an impact something can have. If you give someone opportunity through, being an entrepreneur, through something as simple as water, where they can go to school, where they don't have to worry about getting sick each day, where they can build a life for themselves. If we have those tools at our disposal to encourage and empower people, it could end up making the biggest change in the world. And when I think about the world with Jimmy, it's a lot better with him in it than without it, and so we're just really happy to have him. So like I've mentioned before, water is not an easy thing. It's complicated. It's not just a matter of putting wells and water projects into the locations. You have to make sure that they're sustainable, that they go to the right people, that they're taken care of. It's lots of different steps. I think if I knew everything I knew now when I was 6, there may have been a chance I would have never raised my hand in my class. But I was 6, and I raised my hand, and it ended up doing all this. So I think an important thing for us all to remember is knowledge is important. You need to have a rounded set of information if you're going to pursue business or whatever it is, but don't think that you have to have it in the first place. Sometimes that can even be an impediment. It can stop you from doing something that may be hard or difficult to do. But when we look at issues, whether it's with social change, whether it's with business, sometimes the best ideas are the ones yet to be had. There's things that are different. There are things that people normally wouldn't try. I would have never started as an adult vacuuming my house to try to, fundraise money for a well on the other side of the world. It doesn't make any sense. But that energy, that passion that comes from a sincere place, that's what does. So even though we're older now here in this room, I encourage you to think like 6-year-olds sometimes to do those things, because that's the only way we do make a difference. So I just want to end here with this little story. It was a man, I was on a television show when I was 8, and it was a chef. He was like a nice version of Gordon Ramsay, and he used to have a show called The Galloping Gourmet. And he had me on the show, he gave me food, which was great, and I had a good time. But after the show, he sat me down, he drew me this picture, and he told me a story. He said, "Ryan, in life, everyone has a cup and a saucer." And he told me that for much of his life, his cup was overflowing in a saucer. He had way more than what he needed to live a happy life. And he told me that he kept refilling his cup from his saucer until one day he realized that it made more sense to pour what he didn't need into someone else's cup. So it's a simple way of saying if you have more than what you have, you give back and you share with others. So it's a simple message, but I think the interesting thing about it is I know with my life, I think it's the easiest thing in the world to not realize when your cup is overflowing. You get caught up in the ideas of all the things that you need to be happy and doing that you lose sight of sometimes what you're passionate about and what you care about. So it goes every now and then to take a step back, to reevaluate what you really do need and what you can give back, and to make time for it. It's not to say that you have to pour your cup into someone else's and have nothing left for yourself. I felt really intimidated when I was a kid because I went to different conferences and I saw other youth and kids that were like philanthropists, like crazy activist kids, and they were amazing. They wanted to change the world and do all these things, and I wanted to help, but I also wanted to go home and play Nintendo. I wanted to sleep in on the weekends and sometimes do nothing. But I thought there was two people in the world. You could either be someone who was an entrepreneur and made a huge difference and went out and changed the world, or you could go sleep in. And I think it took me a long time to realize that the people that really do have the biggest impact and make the biggest change in the world are the people in the middle. It's okay to care about something and give to it and be invested and try your best. It's also important to take care of yourself. So you live humbly to make sure that what you're doing isn't just a spur of the moment. When I was 16, I was so excited and I volunteered all of my time and it was amazing. But I'm tired now, I can't do it anymore. I need to forget about it and live my life. Control, pace yourself, find something that you're passionate about, and then hopefully you'll be doing it for the rest of your life and it will make the world a lot better. Good luck for the rest of the conference. For junior achievement, find what you care about and don't be afraid to raise your hand. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Could you please stay up in the stage, please? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We do have time for some questions. Perfecto. Tenemos algunas maneras de poder hacer unas preguntas para Ryan de este auditorio. Creo que tendremos un par. ¿Quién quisiera preguntarle algo? Ryan, por favor, levante la mano. Por ahí tenemos una primera pregunta. Gracias, Jaime. De ese lado, por favor. Si nos pueden, por favor, compartir nombre de qué delegación y la pregunta para Ryan, por favor.
Bueno. Probando? No? Okay. Can I say my question in Spanish or I try it in English?
Yeah.
I tried.
English.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Yasuri Hara, and my team is the number 13. It's a pleasure to meet you. And my question for you is: do you think will have changed if your parents had not mentioned the idea how like to raise the money?
Yeah, when I went home to my mom and dad, I originally thought that they would just give me the money and that would be that. And I'm really glad that they didn't, because it ended up, me doing the work, and it ended up becoming a lot longer. I think the other important thing is that when I said to my mom that my goal was 70 Canadian dollars, she said, okay. And she drew a thermometer and she stuck it on the side of the fridge, and it had lines on it. 2, 4, 6, 8, all the way up to $70. And then every $2 I raised, I got to color in another line, which sounds really simple, but sometimes if we have these big ideas and big goals, you can get really lost in it. So you have to break it down and you have to goal set in a basic way. And I think that was really important for me, because even though for that goal, I ended up failing. I only raised $25 and it was a lot more. I still had an idea of where I was trying to get to and tried different things. I ended up having to work harder and longer, but I had an idea of what success would look like. So I think the important thing is sometimes we find different things that we're trying to do when you're trying to start a business or try to start an idea. And you don't have to, my end of my goal was to bring the world clean water. But you can break that down into smaller goals that make sense, and that was what my parents, and especially my mom, was able to do for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, tenemos una segunda pregunta de este lado, por favor, gracias. Y posiblemente para alguno de los docentes, educadores de forma, también tendríamos una segunda y una última pregunta de este lado, por favor, por los tiempos. Adelante, por favor.
Thanks. My name is Hannah. I'm nervous for this because my English sucks, but I'm trying this. I'm from Morelos. This Cocoyoc. My team is the number 1, and the question is, what is your favorite part about this project?
I think my favorite part about this work is, I talked a little bit about water, and I thought it was just so crazy, the idea that someone didn't have it and that they had to walk really far to go get it and this and that. And I think, I've been able to be part of all this work as a volunteer. And now, ever since 7 years ago, it became my full-time job. And I help with the project work and the fundraising and the advocacy and everything. And I remember I spent about 3 months in Uganda actually doing a lot of the physical work to get more accomplished, comfortable with our local partners and stuff. And I remember one day especially, we were doing a project, and it was a day where everything went wrong. I remember the truck that we were trying to get out there, like it was a big tipper truck, it kind of got stuck, so we had to unstuck it. We had to switch the area where we were drilling the well because we ended up going into a rock that we couldn't get through or something. Like it was shaping up to be a very long day, and it was tough. But then I remember there was a man in that community. I remember he had this like big cowboy hat. He was like this older guy, and he came over and he put on this like American like country accent, and he started trying to tell jokes, and it was the funniest thing I've ever heard. And I remember he had us laughing. It ended up working out really well that day, and we ended up staying for dinner and stuff. But I remember thinking, like, he reminded me of my grandpa, and it was just like an area where there was not a lot, there was nothing. But the fact that water was going in, and I remember listening to him talk when he was more serious later about like what he had to go do to get water when he was younger. And it was just, if you can give people water and they can go to school, they can build a life for themselves, it lets people be like that. It lets people, live their lives to the fullest. So I remember that especially, is that sometimes basic things can go a long way for people who are living in extreme poverty. So I try to remember that.
Oh, thanks. You are an inspiration for the teenagers in the FIE. Thank you. By the way, my name is Hannah Hernandez. Thank you.
Gracias.
Ok, gracias, Hannah. Ok, y vamos de este lado con una pregunta de los docentes, por favor. De este lado, Jaime, por favor. Last question, please, Ryan. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Hi, Ryan. Congratulations for your conference. What message would you give to the youth, and what the biggest challenge during your creation of your foundation?
I think the biggest advice that I would have to be is not to wait. Sometimes like I mentioned before, the hardest thing I had to do was raise my hand. And I think that goes a long way at the end of the day, is because even if you don't end up getting involved the same way, it's the first step that's sometimes the hardest. So I think that was really important for me, and the advice that I'd give is when you find that thing, whether you're 6, 16, or 60, is to not be afraid to raise your hand. And I think the other thing, just about like my experience over the years, I remember, I would have started fundraising and doing all this when I was 6, and I'm 32 now, so it's been a part of my life. I remember I was once on a radio show where they volunteered all sorts of entrepreneurs and volunteers from different age demographics. So they interviewed someone who was 0 to 9, someone in their teens, 20s, all the way up to someone in their 90s. And they asked us all sorts of questions like, why do you do what you do? What inspires you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Like, lots of questions. And I would have been the 9-year-old. So we went on the show, we answered all these questions. And after they had finished all the interviews, they found out something really interesting, actually. With the exception of myself and the teenager, everyone else who they had interviewed at some point in their lives had gone through some kind of mental breakdown, had gotten to the point they were so invested in doing so much for the project that they cared about that they couldn't do it anymore. They had to take a break, they had to step away, they couldn't handle it all. And I think that's really important to remember, is that if you find something you care about, jump in and do everything you can with it, but it's okay to care about yourself and take care of yourself. And there's lots of issues in the world, and you can only feel guilty for so long. You have to make sure you take care of yourself as long as you take care of the thing that you care about too. And I think that was an important thing for me to remember over the years after seeing such disparity. Knowing that you still need to take care of yourself is really important.
Thank you so much from GNP.
Welcome.
For all of us.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias. Y para entregar, we'll give you, as a thank you for you. We appreciate so much your conference, really, Ryan. Llamamos en este momento en el escenario, por favor, a las personas que le harán entrega a Ryan. La maestra Cecilia Campos de Guanajuato, la maestra Cecilia Ortega de Ciudad de México y a Emiliano Ibáñez de Puebla, que le entreguen por favor a Ryan el reconocimiento en nombre de todo el FIE y Forma 2023. Ahí está la fotografía. Perfecto. It was an honor, Ryan. Thank you very, very, very much for that. Bueno.
Thank you.
Gracias.
One last.
Ah, ok. El micro. Sí. Thank you very much. Sí, gracias.
Gracias. Solamente un momento para agradecer a Ryan nuevamente y para decirles que esta es como la lata que él tenía. Ryan dio mucha lata. Realmente nosotros, eso es lo que estamos viendo en México. Hemos recorrido con Ryan muchos estados de la República. You have been in many places in the country. Y lo que nosotros queremos entender es que para hacer un pozo se necesita una lata. Dentro de esa lata puede estar un pozo escondido. No sé si alguien ve aquí. Es una pequeña cosa para niños, pero todo lo podemos practicar. Y el pozo no es simplemente un pozo de deseos. Es un pozo de realidades y les invitamos a que ustedes se queden en este pie con esta lata, gran lata, para que ustedes puedan hacer una diferencia. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Bueno. Y también en lo que terminamos de tomar las fotografías, quien esté interesado en comprar el libro de Ryan Hurljack, va a haber un módulo aquí afuera del Salón Hacienda para aquella persona que esté interesada en adquirir el libro de Ryan. En la parte de afuera lo encontrarán. ¿Ok? Buenísimo. Muchas gracias. Nuevamente un aplauso, por favor, para Ryan Hurljack.